Coming up in today's episode.
If I could save just one life from sharing my story, that all the years of trauma, pain, and heartache would be worth it. And I remember leaving that stage and getting ready to walk out of the room and having a lady approach me and say, "You know how you wanted to save a life today? I want you to know that you did."
Enter the Mind podcast, the most real talk, no nonsense podcast on the empowering of the mind. In today's episode, we're going to be interviewing Charlene Madden, women's empowerment coach and creator of the Ignite Your Life BC Women's Workshop. Charlene, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Kyra and I are super excited to hear a bit more about your story and where you've come from. So could you start us off by telling us a bit about how you've gotten to where you are today?
This is probably a 4-decade-long journey, if not more. Kind of started when I was 3 years old. My parents separated. My father was a violent alcoholic, and he used to abuse my half brothers pretty badly. When my mom left, she left my sister and I with my dad and took my brothers. About a weekend, my dad realized as such an alcoholic, he couldn't raise 2 little girls. So he contacted my grandparents, asked if they would take us. My grandmother did not skip a beat. She said, absolutely. So we went to live with my grandmother. Now, my grandmother was an amazing woman, super strong, very much into women's independence, get a good education, get a good job, look after yourself. And I probably learned that lesson a little too well. My grandfather, on the other hand, was a pedophile. And my sister and I, at the age of 3.5, my sister was just over 7, started experiencing sexual abuse at his hands. And this went on for over 9 years. I was just about turning 13 when my sister kind of had a nervous breakdown at school, and everything came out. And the family that I had really only family I had known shattered apart. My grandparents divorced. My grandfather went to jail. And I remember sitting in a social worker's office, and I have these anchor memories as a kid, sitting in a social worker's office and having this social worker pat me on the back saying, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." Now I'm 12 and a half. I don't even know what okay is at this point in my life. And I'm just, trying to do the best that I can. We didn't get any follow-up counseling. This is the 80s, so obviously it wasn't a big thing back then. I go into high school, and I'm carrying this stigma of being a child abuse survivor because I grew up in a small town. Everybody knew. You couldn't get away from it. Everybody was always asking me questions. And I started suffering really early on in high school with depression, anxiety, and I started cutting myself very early into high school and started having suicidal ideologies. My reprieve from this was writing. I loved to write. I loved to pour my emotions out on a page, and that's what I did. And I wrote a lot of poetry, but of course, it's dark and depressing, and it doesn't take long before that draws attention from your teacher. And my teacher sent me to the guidance counselor, who sent me to the school psychologist. And after an afternoon of questions and interviews, she diagnosed me as being bipolar manic depressive. I'm like 15 at the time. I have no clue what that means. Now I just think not only am I a sexual abuse victim, but I'm crazy on top of it. And again, I remember sitting in the office and her going, patting me on the back saying, "Don't worry, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay. If you need to talk, come talk to us." And that was it. Shuffled out the door. No follow-up, no anything. So I'm just like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. So I did the best thing I possibly could, which is what my grandmother had taught me. I threw myself into my schoolwork. And I just buried my head in the sand. And as soon as I graduated high school, I got as far away from the town as I could, because I had learned that geographically, if you ran away from your problems, things got better. Not really, but that's what my lesson from my mom was. So I moved away, married my high school sweetheart, had 3 amazing children. And when I was 28, I could no longer fight the depression that I had been fighting. And I knew if I didn't do something, I was going to end up taking my own life and my kids were going to find me. So I made a decision. I left my home. I left my children because I was not capable of being a parent. I wasn't capable of looking after myself, let alone looking after 3 young children. I moved in actually with my mother-in-law, who said, come stay with me. And I thought maybe that my husband would, come after me and that someone would show me that they loved me and I was worthy. And at that point, our marriage was basically already over. So that didn't happen. So about a month after I had left the house, I met someone else. And of course, I jumped right into that relationship because I was just looking for someone to validate me. And unfortunately, I was really in a toxic place, and so was my partner. So very quickly after we got together, there started to be domestic violence in the relationship. And to me, it was just, I was getting what I thought I deserved at the time. I didn't think I deserved any better. 2.5 years into this, after an extremely bad episode, I made the decision that I was going to take my life. I couldn't deal with this anymore. He had left the house. I went into the medicine cabinet, took all the pills I could find in the house, and sat down to write my goodbye letters to my children. And if that's something anybody has ever contemplated doing or had to do, it's probably the hardest thing you could do. And as I'm writing that letter, I'm realizing that I'm doing the same thing to my children as my parents did to me. I'm abandoning them, but this is permanent. I can't go back from this. And at that point, I wasn't prepared to do that. So I called a cab, went to the emergency room, was checking myself in, and collapsed in the admissions room and woke up to tubes down my throat. Now, my mom had been notified of what had happened, so she said, I think you need to move and come out west. And of course, running away from your problems is always the solution. So what did I do? I jumped on that, moved across the country. But unfortunately, my partner I had been with decided to come with me, and of course said everything was going to be different. It was going to be better, and I sucked right into that. But of course, he came out, and things weren't better. It was the same. So about, geez, I guess we were out there 10, 12 years. And it was 2014. He came to me and said, I'm leaving you. I've met someone else. I'm moving in. And I was devastated, because I just wanted someone to love me. And he moved out, and it was July 1st he moved out, which was Canada Day. So I remember clearly. And I just thought, okay, now it's time we need to get better. We need to focus on improving our lives. 2.5 months after he moved out, I was at work. I had worked at a pub and I was finished work and sitting at the bar, and in walked a police officer. And he said, can I talk to you outside? And this was an officer that had been involved in one of our domestic disputes. So he knew us. And he took me outside and he said, Charlene, I need to tell you something. He's like, your partner has committed suicide. He took his own life. I was devastated. It seemed like my world caved in at that time. I had kind of carried hopes that we would get back together because that was the only love I thought I deserved. And I didn't know what I was going to do now. And so 2 weeks into it, I'm dealing with this grief. I'm dealing with my children's grief because he had raised my kids for 13 years and he was the closest to a dad that they had. And I started to get really angry. And I remember sitting with a good friend at the time, and she said, it's okay. Anger is one of the stages of grief. And I said, no, you don't understand. I'm not angry that he took his own life. I'm angry that he did it first. Because he has now robbed me of my opportunity to do it, because now I've seen how lives are shattered, the pieces that people have to pick up, the repercussions of this action. I see it. And I was angry that I couldn't do that to people at that time. Year later, I'm not doing well. I hadn't dealt with anything. I started seeing a psychiatrist. And I wasn't in a place where I could get the help. My psychiatrist hadn't, I remember asking her, well, how did you deal with your depression? And I remember her saying, oh, I've never dealt with mental illness. And I'm sitting there thinking, how can you possibly tell me that you understand if you've never been there? You've never felt this way. So how can you tell me it's going to be okay? And I'm just going back to everyone who's patted me on the back and told me it's going to be okay. And I'm going, you've never gone through it. So how do you know it's going to be okay? And I had received a life insurance policy from my partner passing away. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't do this anymore. And I'm making plans. I was purchasing a house. And I remember my psychiatrist being so excited that I was purchasing a house because she's like, oh, I'm so happy you're making plans for the future. And I'm thinking to myself, no, you don't understand. I'm making plans for the future, but my children's future, because this is what I'm going to leave my children. This is going to be their inheritance when I take my life. So I moved into my house in September. My plan was in October, I was taking my life. I needed a month to get everything in, settled, and then I was taking my life. I'd already made the plans. I knew how I was doing it, where I was doing it, what day I was doing it. Right before that date, I had a friend who was attending a woman's workshop, and she said, I really want you to come with me. She goes, I don't want to go alone. And I was like, last thing I wanted to do. And she's like, I'm afraid to go by myself. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll go. Because I always cared and looked after everybody else. You know, I didn't want her to feel, hurt or in pain or feel lonely. So I thought, okay, I'll go to this workshop with you. It started on a Saturday. I was taking my life on Monday. It was okay. I remember pulling up to the workshop on this Saturday. I had my hunting rifle in the back seat of my car. And I just had to get through 2 days. And then I was going that Monday morning because we all know Mondays suck. So what better day to end your life? I was going the Monday morning and I was going to the same place that my partner had shot himself. And I was going to do the exact same thing. And I walked into that room and I felt sick to my stomach because I felt like I did, like, talk about not belonging ever. I didn't belong in that room. I was with a bunch of women who were excited about their future and making plans. And I'm thinking, I just need to get through the next 2 days. And, I sit down and I listen to the first couple speakers and they're talking about finances. And I'm thinking, doesn't apply to me anymore. And health and well-being. And that doesn't apply to me anymore. And then a woman got on stage and she was bald. She had alopecia. So she had lost all her hair. And she started talking about self-love. And I'm listening to her story and I can actually hear a little voice in the back of my head going, what about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, what if I could love myself? Like here she is, in a position where she should, not have self-love, I'm thinking, but she loves herself. Like, why couldn't I love myself enough and stop relying on it externally from other people? I kind of shushed it down and next speaker gets up and she's talking about living with mental illness. And I'm thinking to myself, as I'm listening to her story, she's embraced her mental illness. She's accepted it as part of her life. And I'm thinking, well, I can hear that voice. What about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, what if you could accept this? It's part of your life and learn to live with it instead of fighting against it. And then the last speaker come up and he was a gentleman and he shared so raw and authentically about the struggle he had with both mental illness, painkiller addiction, alcoholism, and suicidal ideology. And he talked about trying to find the perfect mix of pain medication and alcohol so he could make it look like an accidental overdose because he sold life insurance. So he knew what he needed to do in order to provide for his kids. And I thought to myself, wow, like this is me. And he was just minutes away from passing away with his kids in the house when he got help. And he had taken that experience and he had made the decision. He got clean, he got sober, he got the help he needed, and now he was sharing his story to provide hope for other people. And this little voice that I've been hearing in the back of my head now is screaming at me. And it is like, what about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, what about me? What if I could take everything that's happened and I could use it for good instead of letting it destroy my life? What if I could just share that story to give hope to other people to say, hey, I know how you feel. I've been there. You don't have to stay there. There is hope. And it was in that moment that everything changed. I decided in that moment at that workshop that I was going to live. And not only live, I was going to create a life that I was passionate about, a life that had purpose. And that's what I've done.
Very moving
Woo!
story. What a long story of turbulence and ups and downs and turning the corner, and then a tragic event happens. And when you were talking about growing up and having all those professional helpers, therapists, psychologists, and whatnot, social workers tell you that, oh, it's going to be okay. What do you wish they had told you instead?
I didn't know what okay was, and I think that's what the struggle was, because I had not felt okay through my entire life. Like, my entire childhood was so disruptive that I had no idea what okay was. Um, Maybe, you're going to get through this. You've got the strength to get through this, because I didn't feel like I had any control. I didn't feel like I had any power in anything that happened. I mean, that's probably why in my early life I struggled so much with being a control freak, because I had no control over my life, so I went a little bit over the top in that. But yeah, I think maybe if someone would have related, if I would have known that someone else had experienced it, because at the time, again, like, you feel like you're all alone in it. If someone would have sat down, hey, I understand how you're feeling. This is my experience. Then I could have related more to that, because I could have looked at it as, okay, you've been there. What did you do? How did you get through it? Because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for someone to lead me out of the dark, because I was so stuck in it. I didn't see a way out. So, yeah, I guess if someone would have related their own personal stories, if they had it. Um,
It sounds like one of the compounding factors is this idea that I'm the only one that's dealing with this problem. I think that's a false thought that makes things worse, actually, right?
Yeah.
oh, for sure.
One thing that stands out to me is that I know people with similar stories. I know there are people out there suffering in similar ways. So if they were listening to this right now, what are some things that you would want to convey to them?
I think for me, the shift really came, and I looked at it as each speaker um, put it in the order that I needed to be in. Um, I needed to love myself first. Um, Coming from, the traumatic childhood that I had, I was just yearning for outside validation. And at the end of the day, it's never going to work. You're never going to feel fulfilled. And it honestly wasn't until I looked at myself and I had made it. And I remember that weekend going home and saying, if I'm the only one who ever loves me, and I know, because at the time, sometimes you don't look outside of it, so you don't see all the other people. But I said, if I'm the only person that loves me, it's going to be enough. I am enough. My love is enough. And that's all we can focus on, is at the end of the day, we care about ourselves enough to get help, to make changes. And so that was my first step.
I want to dive in really quick to the self-love. What stood out to me from what you said was that you can't just rely on the external validation. And that's something I think I can resonate with. I think regardless of who you are, your background, the various traumas you've gone through, I think every human being on earth is susceptible to external validation, or sort of becoming addicted to that, maybe, or dependent on it. And at least from my perspective, the risk is that if that goes away, it's almost like withdrawing from a drug. The response is so intense on the emotions and the psyche. If someone who likes you, a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, stops liking you, or a boss at work that always tells you good job, and then one day says, ooh, this project was not done as well as you could have. Is that how you see the validation?
I think understanding that needing outside validation is really it's a primal instinct that we have, right? Like, you've heard of people talk about our survival back in the caveman days relied on being part of a tribe. There was safety in numbers. We needed um, that community to keep us safe. And if we got ostracized and, kicked out of the tribe, it could mean life or death. And I think understanding that we're not in those times, and that we are nowadays responsible for our own health and safety and well-being. Um, do we always do I say that I don't look for external validation? That would be a complete falsehood. We still do. I mean, I love when my husband comes home and, or, when I'm getting up and getting ready for work and he says, "Oh, you look great." And I love, of course we look for that still, but I think it's shifting from looking for it and appreciating it to needing it. And I think that's where I was at. Like, I needed it. I needed that to define my worth as a person. And I think when you shift that, I remember doing, because my husband and I regularly do marriage counseling just because we think it strengthens our marriage. And, I remember talking to the counselor and saying, he goes, "How do you feel about your marriage?" And I said, "I love my marriage. I'm passionate about my marriage. But if my marriage ended today, I know I would be okay." And he's like, "Well, why, why do you think?" And I said, "Because I know at the end of the day, I'm enough, and I don't need the outside support." Do I want my marriage to end? Of course not. But it shifted. And I mean, I used to be the person that clung to the toxic relationships because I needed it. And now I know that at the end of the day, I don't need it. I may choose and want it, but I don't need it. And I think when you can shift that, that's where everything comes into focus.
And what does that journey look like, learning to shift to that place of not needing it?
I mean, I don't mean to simplify it because it's not simple, but for me, it was a decision. Like, really, you have to make the decision.
When you make that decision, it's like, there's no other, it's happening. It's like when you were a kid and you decided to win the dodgeball game, you're like, "I'm winning today." You're like, nothing's getting in my way. I'm winning this dodgeball game. Right.
Like, you have to decide, you make the decision and then you do the work. Because when you don't love yourself, like I didn't, it meant that I was going to have to get down in the trenches and do the work that I needed to do to fully love myself and accept myself. Because I mean, I didn't feel like I was a good parent. I had a lot of things in my life that I wasn't proud of. And how do you love that? And I think one of the biggest things for me in learning to love myself 100% was giving myself the grace and understanding. And I mean, this helped with my journey in forgiveness, was to understand that I did the best I could at the time with the tools that I had in my toolbox. I did the best with the coping skills that I had at the time. But self-love meant that I had to keep refilling that toolbox, finding other things that, were filling my cup. And I mean, self-care was huge, understanding that I needed to look after myself in order to be the best mom I could be, the best daughter I could be, the best wife I could be. I needed to involve, some self-care techniques into my life. So.
I know that it was a long journey of turbulence and everything, but I feel like it's really cool how your mind just like all of a sudden like just kind of switched into this like, all right, well, I'm going to have to do some self-care. In order for that voice to come up and be like so clear in your life, I feel like it takes a big amount of consciousness and like a big amount of like understanding within yourself to be able to say that to yourself after everything you've been through, to be able to say that to yourself with like compassion, almost like that's really awesome.
I work coaching women, and that is the one thing that I really preach with them is you have to get radically honest about your life. You have to, where am I at? How did I get here? Because, we like to look back at our circumstances and think, that's why I'm here. Well, we all know that we're here because of the choices that we have made. So what are the choices that I made to get me there? And what choices can I make going forward? What choices do I need to make going forward? So self-love and radical honesty were the two things that made the biggest difference in my life.
a lot of people out there who have gone through similar experiences, victims of abuse, they might struggle with this idea of how to relate to their abusers. Are they angry towards their abusers? Do they forgive their abusers? There's so many possible paths for that to go down. Is there a path that you recommend or that you think is the most healing?
I can say from my own personal experience, and I'm sure many people have heard this analogy, that um, being angry and holding on to stuff is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die, right? We've heard that because in my situation, my grandfather he's passed away. My grandmother's passed away. My dad passed away. So me hanging on to everything I was hanging on to wasn't hurting them. It was just hurting me. So being able to forgive and look at using the own grace that I gave myself and understanding that they honestly, everybody in my situation I look at was doing the best that they could with the tools that they had. Like I said, um, trauma is usually generational. It was in my situation. I mean, my mother was abused and raped by her dad. So I had a lot of animosity and anger towards my mom for allowing us to go live with her dad, knowing what he was. And my relationship with my mom now is probably stronger than it's ever been because I look at, again, that my mom did the best that she could at the time with what she was going through. And I think understanding that and giving yourself the same grace, like I said, that you're giving everybody else, but knowing that forgiveness is only, it's for you. It's not for anybody else. And you deserve to be free from all that pain and heartache that letting go of it gives you. So
Yeah, totally. Thank you for sharing that.
So you had two experiences, right? You had the first experience where you were going to commit suicide, but you didn't. And then there was the second time when you legit like planned it and you were like, this is a decision, like this is happening. I'm doing it. I found it amazing that God was like, nope. Like, nope. Like, listen, I gave you free will and everything, but like this bad decision, it's too bad. I need you here, So he was like, all right, well, I got to come in. I got to send her, this women's empowerment 3-day thing, and I'm going to do it right now.
The fact that you did attend this workshop at the timing that you did, what do you make of that?
Oh, absolutely. I know I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I don't believe it was coincidence that I was put in that situation. And I believe, I always say, because everyone's beliefs are the same God. I didn't grow up religious. My spirituality has developed through my journey of growth. But I always say that it was almost like I could hear a sigh from God or universe after I made that decision, because it was almost like I'm going, wow, it's about time, like we've been waiting for you to come. And like I definitely believe that there's divine plan for everything that I've gone through. So
what is the main thing, I guess, that kept you taking those steps forward during this long journey? What was that thing inside of you?
I've always wanted to help people. And I remember being interviewed and someone asking me, well, what did you want to be when you grew up? I'm sure it changed. And I was like, well, no, like I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to share other people's stories. There's so much pain and heartache in the world, and I wanted people to have a voice. And that really resonated with me because as a child going through all the stuff that I was going through, I felt I didn't have a voice. I wasn't able to say what was happening to me, and I didn't want other people to suffer. So I think being at that workshop and hearing those stories, I realized how many people were out there suffering, and I thought, how many more people sitting in this audience at that workshop are feeling the same way that I am, because I carried on this persona of having my crap all together, right? Like I was managing a pub, I was, I had buying a house, like no one knew. The inside I was falling apart, and I wondered how many other people were like me and how many people could be impacted by a message of hope. And I think that that's, like I thought if I could save And I remember my first speaking, because I went back a year later and spoke at that same workshop and shared my experience. And I remember saying at the end of my talk that, my goal and I feel my purpose now in life, because I felt after that workshop, I had my purpose. And that's what made the huge shift for me, was that if I could save just one life from sharing my story, that all the years of trauma, pain, and heartache would be worth it. And I remember leaving that stage and getting ready to walk out of the room and having a lady approach me and say, "You know how you wanted to save a life today? I want you to know that you did." And I was like, and I still get goosebumps every time I tell that story, but, and I thought, awesome. Next, let's go find the next person that we can help. Let's go find the next person that we save. And now I'm like, I'm greedy about it. I just want to impact lives. I want to help people. And that's what my purpose is. So
How many years was it until you opened your women's empowerment workshop?
I just did my first workshop in 2020.
Wow.
Yeah. And and the funny thing
Congrats.
was, it was 2016 when I attended that workshop that changed my life.
Oh, wow.
And I attended the next year, so 2017. And then the lady that was hosting it said, it's too much. I can't do it. It's a lot of stress. And so we didn't have any in 2018 and 2019. And I remember sitting there going, it's really unfortunate that she's not having these workshops, because I know the impact that it can have on people's lives.
Mhm.
And there was that little voice in the back of my head that said, well, what about you? Same message I'd heard. And I was sitting there thinking, yeah, what about me? Like, why don't I create a workshop in the same format? Because I know the power that these workshops can have. I'll create my own workshop. And I just, I had a lot of help, but that's what I did. So I had the first one live, second one last year was virtual. So, but
Mm.
it's just a great way to help people feel like they're not alone. So
Just want to reflect overall on today's conversation and share my appreciation to you of the rawness and just real stories that you shared, because there's, as I said, I know there's people out there listening to this that have been through similar things. And so if they want to find out more about you or attend one of your workshops or learn more about them, what would be the best way for them to do that?
you can reach out to me on Facebook. Charlene Madden, speaker and author, is my Facebook page, or you can find me at my workshop page, Ignite Your Life, and on all the social media platforms. And I always like to end my interviews with just throwing it out there that I know what it's like to sit in the dark alone. And I always tell people, if you're ever in a place where you're in that situation where you're feeling alone and you're feeling in the dark, reach out to me at any time. Doesn't matter. I will come and sit in the dark with you, probably virtually, but I don't want anybody to ever feel alone like I did. So, I am available 24 hours a day if anybody is struggling and needs help and just needs to talk to someone who understands what they're going through.
What a heartfelt invitation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on and just sharing that extremely empowering story.